I didn't hate this. Honestly, no one is more surprised about this than me, but I don't think the Warcraft movie is all that bad. I had all these puns ready and everything. I wanted to call it Warcraft, Snowcraft, a film I wish I hadn't paid for craft. But honestly, no matter how hard I try, I just can't bring myself to hate it. And while I can't say that it's a movie I adore craft, it sticks enough to the lore craft that it'll leave fans wanting more craft. Fuck it, here's El Salvador craft. I'm not sorry. Now this was particularly surprising because while I try to avoid reviews wherever I can before I write my own, the kind of sites I frequent unfortunately had a fair bit of unavoidable coverage on this movie. And it was getting some crazy negative press, which seemed to indicate it'd be everything I feared. But you know what? Having now seen it in full, I can honestly say it's fine. Not great, not bad. It's got some really good ideas that work fairly well, but occasionally poor execution. However, overall, I think it has enough heart that I sincerely don't regret seeing it. Now, don't get me wrong, I totally get the criticisms. It is fairly bloated, the characters can often come across paper thin, the script perhaps takes itself far too seriously, and I completely understand why people don't like it, and they're more than welcome in that opinion, but I just don't see the train wreck here that everyone says it is. I don't want to spoil too much because I know there's a really big community who are beyond hyped for this thing, so I'll just give the cliff notes for those not in the know. First of all, it's worth noting that this movie is a live-action adaptation of the video game series Warcraft. That's Warcraft the RTS, by the way, not the hugely popular follow-up MMO World of Warcraft. You know, the one that even your granda had a level 90 blood elf on under the handle of Pussy Slayer 42. The film acts as a sort of retelling of the events of the first game, although they draw a lot from the expanded fiction, since the story of that game can be pretty much summed up with, once upon a time, some orc buggers wanted to gan mental where our human world, and we were geet. Yeah. Fuck off, you orky bastards. I mean, the title of the game was Orcs versus Humans. It really doesn't get much more simple than that. The movie's complexity comes in the sympathetic nature of both sides. There's one clear villain in this movie, but everyone else, despite being on opposite ends of conflicts, is more morally grey. The film sets the tone for this immediately by opening up rather bravely and unexpectedly telling things from the Orcs' perspective, who look great, by the way. Whew, that's some lovely hair physics. And we're introduced to Duratan, a war chief for the Orc Horde, and his pregnant wifey Draka. Immediately, I warmed up to the movie because this small opening segment with them where they talk about what to name their child was legitimately really cute. And I'm not gonna lie, it put a smile on my face. The dialogue felt natural, the CG impressive, and I was drawn to the choice to start with a small intimate moment before all the stabby death stuff in a movie that has war literally in the title. From here, we find out that the orcs need to find a new home because their place is fucked. And so their leader, Gul'dan, the evilest looking motherfucker on the planet, who might just be the offspring of a boozy night between Satan and Mr. Lordy, opens a portal to the human land of Azeroth. And obviously, they're just some orc, they're just some men, cannot make it any more obvious. War rains down upon these mighty kingdoms. If this all sounds really super nerdy, it's because it is. This movie is completely unashamed to be wholeheartedly a Warcraft movie through and through, for better or worse. And I can respect that. Everything's got this kind of cartoony, stylized look to it that feels right out of the games. From the sets, to the character designs, to even the texture of the walls. It's brimming with colour. It sometimes looks exactly like those CG trailers they used to put out for WoW. It even goes so far as to include the massive fuck-off eyebrows the elf species have that come off of their faces. What are these gravity-defying entities? Are they born with these? Do they cut them with hedge trimmers? Do they let their children hold them like handlebars of a bike while they make motor noises when giving them piggybacks? Truly, the lore of this universe is a wonderful enigma. Now, some people are going to hate how this film looks, and again, I understand that. Often sets look fake and cheap and environments are extremely saturated, but I totally get why director Duncan Jones went for this look, because it's the most true to the source material thing I have ever seen, at least aesthetically. I kinda enjoyed this style, I kinda didn't. It sort of fluctuated in places for me. I think the movie looks best when there's no human element on screen, but the second you slap Dominic Cooper's beautiful mug in the middle of these lush green fields, I have a hard time sort of mentally placing him as being actually part of this really stylized world. I think you'll get a lot more out of it if you're a fan, but if you're not, you might have a hard time with just how removed from reality and occasionally intangible the land of Azeroth appears. Now, while the style kind of flip-flopped for me, one thing that genuinely held the movie together in my mind was some of the ways the narrative handled its bigger ideas. It was legitimately refreshing to see that this didn't just end up being a generic fantasy where we follow some knights taking on a big evil. The film frames conflict from both sides of the trenches, and that is its greatest asset. Though there's a physical antagonist in this movie, the true villain here is war, as it's ultimately what all of the heroes of the film on both sides of the brutality want to end. There is also this wonderful recurring theme of parenting that really gives this movie some heart. Both protagonists on the opposite sides of the fight are trying, in a time of conflict, to look out for their children. And while the theme of father-child relationships is not something I can relate to, since my dad never loved me, I can see it's a lovely way to ground the fiction with an emotional real-world pull. The problem is it tackles such strong ideas and themes with a sea of pretty bland characters, especially where the humans are concerned, whose entire personalities can literally be summed up by their job title. This dude's a king. His traits are he's noble and wise. This dude's an apprentice. He's kinda clumsy and untrained. This dude's a knight. He's a good fighter and headstrong. Their personalities literally read like a character specialization sheet in a roleplay game, which I suppose is kinda fitting, but doesn't make for a good driving force in a movie. The orcs fare a lot better though, and I actually found myself liking them more than the people, especially Garona, the character caught between all the fighting, a half-orc, half-human hybrid, or half-orc, half-Draenei if you want to get really picky, but please don't because I'll hate you, who finds herself an ally of neither side. I like how you know she's one of the good guys because she's the sexy orc, and that's not just me admitting to a weird fetish. The film even pretty much jokingly admit that she's the hot one in a surprisingly humorous and awkward moment where a couple of protagonists sit around a campfire. Unfortunately, there isn't much of this light-hearted tone, but when it is present, it's a welcome addition, especially when it confirms your worries that it's totally not weird to think the orc is sexy. They know she's sexy. You're supposed to think she's sexy. It's not just me. Shut up. I think the problem with this movie though, and why it is perhaps getting the bad reception, is that, at least for the average film goer, it never really excels at anything. It's all completely functional. The action is nice popcorn fare, but never has you on the edge of your seat. The soundtrack is fine, but don't expect to come out humming it. The ideas are good, but they're wrapped up in a mostly straightforward fantasy narrative. But I imagine if you're a fan, this becomes a whole different bag. I've only had minor exposure to the Warcraft games, but even off the back of that, I was still taken aback by just how true to the world the film looked and felt. And even though this movie wasn't really for me, I do want to see it do well and succeed. Maybe I'm being a little too generous because I like the director Duncan Jones, or maybe it's just because I have a sordid history with the video game movie adaptation, as chronicled in this channel's video podcast series, Video Game Movie Madness, which you should totally watch, shameless plug. Oh, hell of a cough there. But I really hope this movie finds its audience. And even though I didn't personally love this one, I definitely think there are people out there totally involved in this world that'll really dig it. Hell, I'd even like to see it get sequels, because a movie depicting the tragic fall of Arthas from Warcraft 3 would be the point where I'd become one of those fans who can just be happy to see a story they love faithfully adapted to the big screen. But I guess it all depends on how much money it makes. I mean, the cinema was empty on opening day when I went over here in Britain, though I read it made an absolute bomb in pre-sales tickets in China, so who knows? Mind you, I imagine sales will slow down over there post-opening when audiences get confused as to why there's this whole war thing going on and why the protagonist isn't just farming gold all the time.